This time I'm going to attach this before I start recording so you can hear me. Hi friends. In today's video, I want to give you my first impressions of the new for Fuji X mount, the Sigma 18-50 2.8 lens. And I want to start out by saying that although this lens isn't new to the photographic world, it is new for Fuji, and in my view, quite exciting for what it provides. When we look at the Fuji zoom lens cosmology, this lens definitely fills a gap, and for that reason, to me, it's super exciting. Now, I know that there are some really great reviews of this lens formula out there already, so I'm not going to focus so much on a review, but I am going to talk about how it fits into the Fuji lens lineup and what gaps I see it filling. And the first gap filler that this lens provides is that of price. When we look at the cost of this lens versus the 15 Fuji zoom lenses that currently are in production, we see that the only lenses that beat this on price are those 3 XC zoom lenses, none of which competes with the Sigma 18-50 2.8 on quality of build, quality of image, and of course, which do not reach the bright 2.8 aperture that this does. So when it comes to price, it's obviously one of the best values out there, maybe the best zoom value out there for Fuji now. When it comes to weight, this lens beats 13 of Fuji's zoom lenses, including the lens most people will probably directly compare it to first, the Fuji 18-55 2.8 f4 variable aperture lens. Of course, the additional weight of that Fuji lens comes from having optical image stabilization, which this lens does not have, of course. But for those of you like me who find weight a concern when holding a camera all day at an event or doing street photography work, it's the 10 ounces that this lens has is welcome. And when you consider again the bright 2.8 aperture, fixed aperture, I know that I say this all the time, but when it comes to the size of your overall kit, the smaller the size, the more likely that you'll have it with you when it matters most. And that's why for me, just on those 3 factors alone, cost, weight, and aperture, there's really no question about buying this lens before that massive Fuji 16-55 2.8 lens. If you can't compromise at all on sharpness and image quality, maybe the 16-55 would be the way to go. But for my money and the type of photography I do, this lens gets me all the quality I need and those other 3 benefits. But I also have to be quick to say that I'm shooting this lens with the Fuji X-T4, which has sensor stabilization and which compensates for the lack of optical image stabilization that this lens does not have. So if you happen to be shooting with any of Fuji's smaller cameras or older Fuji X cameras, which are not equipped with sensor stabilization, then perhaps the Fuji 18-55 2.8 to f4 lens, or this very much abused, loved, and used 16-80 f4 lens that I have here is an example of a couple options for you that have image stabilization, which can be very nice depending on what you're shooting, when and how, if you don't have it on your Fuji body. But for me, and again, my money, I'd rather save it on the lens, get this lens, and put that money into a Fuji body that comes equipped with sensor stabilization. Next, I want to talk about a feature that a lot of people ignore or gloss over, but which for me is pretty massive. And that's the issue of close focus, or in my mind, a better way to talk about it, maximum reproduction ratio. And that's where this lens, again, really, really is impressive. It has a max reproduction ratio of 1:2.8 at the wide zoom end, which beats all 15 of Fuji zoom lenses. Now, for me, he uses Fuji zoom lenses to get in really, really close in the work I do with bike restoration work. I've always really liked the 1:4 reproduction ratio that the 16-80 f4 gets me. That's been pretty good. But the fact that the Sigma can beat that and get near macro levels of closeness is just really appealing to me. So that's how this lens fits into the Fuji zoom cosmology. For me, it's definitely a gap filler. And that's not to say that it's perfect, and while I haven't been shooting with it for very long, I can say that there's one thing I really don't like about it, and that's the lack of an aperture ring. That's not going to bother everyone, especially those of you who prefer to map a dial to aperture anyway. But for me, having an aperture on the lens, that's part of what I love most about Fuji and that drew me to the form factor anyway. But I'm a weirdo, I know. So yeah, also This lens doesn't claim weather sealing. For me, I don't worry about that too much, but if you're one who likes the reassurance of having that WR label on a Fuji lens and the reassurance that gives you, maybe you want to keep that in mind. One other thought from someone who has primarily been using this lens to shoot video and not photos lately for my bike restoration work again, I have perhaps an irrational hope, or had a hope, that this lens would solve the one issue that plagues the Fuji X system, especially with this lens, the 16-80 f4, and that is the issue of when you zoom, it loses focus dramatically. And of course, all Fuji lenses that are varifocal, you can expect to see that focus shifting, but it's just really bad with Fuji, and some lenses are worse than others. So I hoped, again, probably irrationally, that this Sigma 18-50 2.8 would solve that. It doesn't, but it might be a little better than this one. But either way, I learned long ago not to zoom while recording with Fuji anyway, so it's neither here nor there for me. Just something I thought I'd mention. But that aside, the build quality of this lens feels excellent to me. I love that it was made in Japan. I love the tactical feel where everything feels grippy and the tolerances are tight. It feels good in the hand, it looks good, and yeah, I just wish it had an aperture ring, like I said. But regardless, there's a lot to love about it. And I, for one, am really, really excited to get out and use it more for video and photo work. But in the meantime, remember to do some good with your cameras, and we'll talk to you again real soon.